and that one, and then we'll come to the panel.
Ihtisham Ahmed, London School of Economics. Comment to Francesca and then to Laura. Nick Stern and I spent the best part of the 1980s working on optimal tax design for developing countries. We started with India, Pakistan, then extended to Mexico. So in a sense, we were really focusing on the design of relative price changes that comes through the indirect tax system, looking at the scope for particularly the value-added tax, and the design of the value-added tax and the interactions with the income taxes. So in a sense, a lot of the work that we had done in the 1980s, which was largely India, but also Mexico, really incorporated it wasn't general equilibrium per se, but it was a more general approach than just the microsimulation models that Laura talked about. So in a sense, really, if you are looking at changes from customs to value-added tax, then you need to look through what happens with the customs vector, then what happens with the VAT vector, and the difference may not be a great deal. And it might actually be to the advantage of countries to move from customs to the value-added tax. That's why the IMF has been pushing on efficiency grounds the value-added tax. So the question to Laura is, we had done this work in the 1980s, and there are papers on Mexico which showed, again, there was work done by Seade and Musgrave following up on the work that Nick Stone and I had done. And then that was in the mid-1980s, and then 2005, again, there was work by Urusa. Again, right? Urusa.
Yeah.
Again, it's the Ahmed Stern model revisited. Yeah. So in a sense, there was that body of literature that was available, and the question is why you didn't use it. Because also, I had led an IMF mission in 2007. Carstens had said, don't talk to me about the value-added tax, I can't do it. So I cannot even address it. And indeed, it failed in 2010, but it worked in 2014. 13, 14. So I'll come back to the political economy of the reforms. But the question really is why you didn't use the more general approaches which looked at the both producer responses and the household responses in your analysis.
Just hang on to that for a second. We'll move on to the second question, please.
Thank you, Sheila Page, ODI. A couple of questions. First, a very specific one to Laura. The proposal for VAT in Mexico in 2010 was, as you say, to reduce the deficit. So I don't quite understand why you worked out ways of spending the money. I mean, yes, it could have been made neutral, it could have been made redistributional, but that wasn't the object of the game. But more generally, on the question of the morality, which I think is very important, have any of you looked at the relationship between willingness to pay taxes and share of aid in the government budget? Because this is something I've certainly come across informally in Zambia. People's reactions is, this is taking care of health and education is DFID's problem, it's not ours. And we don't have any commitment to the government because they're accountable to DFID and World Bank and IMF, not to us. So how you actually looked at willingness to pay taxes and ODA shares? And one question which has been raised and not answered, I think at least twice, and that's the problem of how you measure or model pass-through, because this is pass-through, because this is extremely important, and the evidence from ages ago even on the UK is that the more frequent things change, the more things get passed through. But whether anyone has actually developed that into a model or a way of predicting it, I don't know. But how do you do it other than guess, which was the old method?
Okay, can we just go to the gentleman behind and then...
Thank you very much indeed. The name's Ewan Grant. I'm the former Customs and Excise Intelligence Analyst for transnational organised crime, and my questions are partially based on a presentation I will be giving to the Cambridge Economic Crime Symposium in early September on cooperation between governments and NGOs in taxation of natural resources. First question very quickly for Ms. Abramovsky. In Mexico, your study of Mexico, did you get any indication, qualitative or quantitative, about the impact of systemic VAT fraud, industrial scale VAT fraud, in relation to trade with neighbours, particularly the United States, and what measures were taken between the two countries to cooperate on that? And secondly, for Ms. Bastagli, which is extremely interesting, your comments about natural resources and the implications of the revenues there. Do you have any, again, qualitative or quantitative data in relation to whether those natural resource revenues are coming in as expected or above or significantly below? Are reasonable benchmarks being met? One of the key points I will be making in my presentation in September is about the impact on those revenues in Africa of what I call the Netanyahu Syndrome. And I might add that that is not Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you.
I think it was the lady. I think we'll have to go for some answers at that point because we've got quite a long list.
Anna Thomas, I'm from the NGO ActionAid. We've done a lot of work over the last few years, particularly on corporate taxation, corporate tax avoidance. I just wanted to respond to Francesca's first question there with another question. Why would you address equity concerns only through the spending side? So in the short term, if you were designing a tax system from scratch, which you're not, of course, but if you were, you might want to focus more on raising revenue from indirect taxes because you will raise revenue more quickly. And as Nora was saying, that could result in a sort of overall increase in equity if there's progressive spending. But in the medium term, why would you stop there? Why would you not also look for a more progressive direct tax system such as most of the advanced economies have?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to arbitrarily go from my left to right in terms of answers. So can I?
Yeah. So first, can you repeat your name? I will get it again. So we have spoken to SUA. We have done. I haven't presented it today. The whole issue about incidence of taxes and is crucial, and for indirect taxes, I mean, it's super important even for social national insurance contributions in the UK. Like, it's not even clear what the incidence is. So we are working not only for developing countries but for developed countries, and it's quite challenge to develop models to really estimate and quantify the incidence of taxes on the different agents of the economy. So I totally agree with you. So we have done, and we have a paper that has started doing behavioral analysis of builds a demand system that looks at how consumers react to changes in prices, and then we build that into this micro simulator static with the behavioral margin, and we try to look at the efficiency, simulate reforms, introduce a uniform VAT, and see whether we have any efficiency gains from distorting less relative prices. We have done that. There is a paper, very work in progress. The model is there. Ursula, in fact, we have spoken to him and to Scott in Mexico and with other people. So we have been.
You should look at the book that Nick Stern and I did.
Yeah, definitely. So I was going to ask you. I'm super interested on that, and so on that, like, we want to do more, and so one of the challenges we have is to try to measure prices in the formal and informal sector, which is quite important. If you are thinking VAT affects formal sector, but that have spillovers and affect informal, and that could affect consumer decisions and the whole incidence analysis of VAT. And so we are really working on that. Maybe in a year time we will be able to say something more. We need to do a lot of access to data, measurement stuff, and modeling, etc. But we are working on that. All that, like, in our model so far, we don't model suppliers' responses, and it's quite a complex thing to do both at the same time, as I'm sure not that you are aware. And at IFS, there are some researchers that are working very, very hard on trying to understand the incidence and the pass-through of indirect taxes and duties, for example, like alcohol duties, and like taking into account the competition of the supermarket sector. So at the end of the day, incidence of any of these taxes depends on demand and supply and the elasticities in each market, and could be totally different for each commodity. So yes, at the moment we are assuming the consumer bears the tax, big assumption, but I think from zero to that, it's good to start somewhere, and it's a valuable exercise. So that's my reply to that. To you, I totally agree with your comment. I should put more context to the reform. The reform was not only about indirect tax. This was one component of a bigger reform. We analyzed also changes to the direct tax system in Mexico, and that generated revenue as well. But also the other thing is that with this 2% expenditure tax, would have raised enough money, I think, to have compensated losses because of the introduction of the 2%, but and then may potentially keep compensate the poor households and keep a bit more. But I will rephrase next time I present it, because I think it's very important. Pass-through, I already said something, and to your question about cooperation, about Mexico and the U.S. border and how the VAT system works there and the fraud and corruption, we haven't looked at that at all. We are trying to look at how differences in VAT rates next to the U.S. border that has been implemented by Mexico until 2014, when it has been very recently eliminated, whether that is giving you some shows up in price level data differently in different areas according to geographic location, and try to look at that. I'm not sure we are going to look into super detail in the political aspects and the fraud and administrative issues at this point, but I think it's super relevant as well. And finally, why not direct taxation? I think it's super interesting and relevant, and I totally agree. I think there is an issue with the tax base in these countries for direct taxation. I think, yes, there are very wealthy individuals, and they are evading taxes, and you can go after them, and that's definitely a tax base that is there, but it's more elusive as well. These people are more mobile, they have instruments like assets all over the world. How do you design, and do you have the administrative capacity to do that? The same applies to multinationals, so all those bases are more mobile, and there is a reason to think it's more efficient to tax less mobile tax bases than the most mobile, because they will go, they are very elastic to the tax rate. So how do you address that? I totally with you. I don't have the answer to that yet, and I think everyone is trying to work hard on how we tackle that. I think with the middle class and the lower, more low-income households, there is an issue with productivity and GDP per capita, and to some extent, I think there is a lot to do with tax policy, social protection, and tax administration improvements. We still need to work a lot, but a lot of the tax capacity, the tax take, will come when these countries develop and are more productive. The firms are bigger, they employ more people, and employees are taxed with withholding taxes as we have here. And I think that's an issue that is very complementary to the whole development agenda that looks at productivity and growth. Let's stop here, sorry.
Thank you. Francesca.
Just very briefly on the question on natural resources, there are different stories from country to country, case to case. Stories vary, but yes, there are examples, and I'm happy to send you also papers that have looked at this, including at particular links between revenue from these resources and the way it's been used for social spending, and the challenges associated with volatility in in that revenue source. And again, to colleagues from Action Aid, complete agreement. The reason why I raised the question is that this is something that has been pushed in the literature and is also used often as an excuse or a way out of making systems tax systems more progressive, and in complete agreement, while of course recognizing the sometimes practical constraints that are real, but that can be tackled in order to make sure that if that's the objective, the establishment of a fairer direct tax system, then we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, I think most of the questions had really nothing to do with equity, frankly. And I thought that's what we were doing, but except yours, actually. The answer to your question is yes, we should try. In terms of, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, but if you can't, then try to do it with the spending side. But I think that in addition to and this is something that I was going to suggest to Laura, the measures that you're using may not let you see the points that I made, like how many people would be impoverished by introducing the system. And not only how many people, but to what extent. But you have the information to do it, and you can do it with behavioral responses. I mean, like I said, the messages I gave are general to any system that looks at the before and after, any system. So very sophisticated, very primitive, like we do it, and like what you presented here. But I know you did more. But you do.
It's even simpler than what you did, I think, looking at those before.
So no matter what system you can look at that and then get a better sense on. In terms of, because you're not only worried about what happens to inequality. I think, there's now inequality is really fashionable. 15 years ago, you could not say the word inequality, everything was poverty. And I have to say that the pendulum has gone a little too far, because poverty, which is levels and doesn't have to do with relative positions, is as important. So let's not forget, when we do the kind of analysis that we do, what happens to poverty. And you're not going to see it just with the incidence analysis by decile, because you may not capture there who's falling. It's an average. It's an average. So you don't know what happens within that group.
But also because it's a relative, right? Maybe
but then you see, but you see who won. You do see who wins and who loses, but the average for the decile. You don't know what happened within the intradecile. So that's we haven't measured. I sent you the paper.
Yeah, but we don't see how many people will go below without that analysis, below the poverty line, and that's
no. But you can do that. You can do that very easily. I mean, you have all the data, so that's and if I wanted to make a comment about the methodology, about what households do you use, and again, this is a general statement. I mean, we can use a sophisticated version that you guys did in the 1980s. When it's not consumption versus income, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and people are sloppy about it, saying you can use one or the other. It's because which income are you going to use to rank households by? That's what's important when you look at the incidence and the impact on inequality. In the case of consumption taxes and consumption subsidies, I concluded it makes sense to use disposable income, and consumption is a proxy, because consumption already tells you what you.
Disagree. Huh? I disagree, but like I let you.
But you can when you do direct taxes, you can never use disposable income to rank household to see the incidence. That is completely a no-no.
Say it again, when you.
I mean, you have income before taxes and transfers. Any. I mean, it doesn't matter how you define it. You have virgin income, let's say.
Yeah.
All right, then you have the state coming in. All right, you can say, is there an institutional sequence that looks agreeable? When you look at the impact of direct and taxes and transfers, it is, what is it with respect to your starting position? How does it affect? Okay, so that's what we call market income, other people call primary income, other people call autonomous income, choose a name. But it's, let's say, before the state came in. The counterfactual can be a very sophisticated one. It doesn't have to be the accounting one. That doesn't matter. Then you have what to do with consumption taxes. All right. So you can say really people are not going to spend buying a certain amount of foods if there were no subsidies, for example. And they're not going to pay a number of taxes if they were not going to be able to buy those goods. So you want to have them after they got the transfers. I mean, you have people that may have close to zero income, they wouldn't buy anything. They would not be paying consumption taxes. So you need to analyze after that. So the consumption versus income is not consumption versus market income. It's consumption at the level in which you already have the effect of direct taxes and transfers. And there you can see, yeah, I mean, something may be neutral. And I'm not questioning the fact that they could be neutral or regressive or progressive vis-a-vis consumption.
Can I say something related to that? I'm totally with you there. I think like one bit that I think is missing from what you're saying is the intratemporal dimension that consumption is capturing for living standards. So we can continue later.
But what I'm saying, it's not that I disagree, but what you're capturing with that consumption measure is what happens intertemporally even more after people paid direct taxes and received direct transfers. That's the point.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm going to interrupt now. And we're eating into coffee break. I'm going to say, are there any more pressing questions? There's one floating here. I'm going to take arbitrarily one from over here, whoever gets the microphone first. And then I think that's it, because I presume you guys want me to wind up pretty soon. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Matthew Green-Slade. I work on social protection in DFID. Thanks very much for the great presentations. I have a question, mainly for Nora, I think. So in DFID, we support social protection in a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And we definitely feel now that we need to talk about tax at the same time as social protection. I mean, not only is it challenging analytically, for the reasons we've just heard, but is there a potential sort of legitimacy issue? I mean, do governments like it when you start trying to open up the picture on tax and social spending, the redistributive impacts? What's your experience? What's the potential for us to do more of this in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia?
Right, over there, and you can decide between you, the two people who have their hands up, who's going to ask the question.
Oh, poor her. She has the responsibility of being the kingmaker.
No pressure.
My name is Sandra Nguyen. I'm working for GIZ, the German Development Corporation. And my question also goes to Nora. I would be interested in the driving factors of the results, whether the tax and the transfers were like positive or negative. Have you found any criteria like informality or which kind of taxes or transfers?
Yeah, okay. First, Matthew, I think that from my experience is that governments like it a lot when you bring the whole picture. I mean, that's at least, I was telling you this morning that whenever we presented this in academic fora, I have people that come and tell me, I want to do this in my country, and they sometimes do it for free, which there's a lot of people. I mean, at the end, I have all the teams. There's about 100 people involved in it. When we presented it in places like the IMF and World Bank and their governments there, the reaction has been that the governments have gone, for example, the Indonesian government got to the World Bank and they said, we want this for us. The Chilean government also, we want this analysis. They want to see what's happening on both sides and be able to gauge if they're going to make a change, what's going to be the impact. And I think we need to make it more sophisticated than just this accounting framework. But they love the idea of having a systemic view. And as an analyst, to your question, I haven't. What's interesting is once you do this granularly, you begin to see that you have to beware of making generalizations, because I say that I sort of get into the intimacies of the fiscal system of every country, and they tell a different story that reflects the political economy equilibrium and reflects accidental institutional aspects, everything. But I can't say for sure that there is always going to be, I mean, you can see that direct transfers are always equalizing. I haven't seen any unequalizing direct transfers so far. In general, I've seen direct taxes to be equalizing. In some countries, the contribution for taxes is higher than for transfers. It's not, I can't say. Then, in some cases, indirect taxes are unequalizing, but in other cases, they're not. In some cases, indirect subsidies are equalizing. In other cases, they're not. So I think that the lesson is beware of generalizations. Really, every story has to be looked at it by itself, and probably not just looked once. I mean, I have one data point. We want to know the movie, what's going to happen in the future. So what we're trying to do with the Institute is actually to generate an impetus for a recurrent analysis of this so you can trace over time what happens.
Okay. I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask you, Nora, the elevator question. You're in the elevator with the Secretary of State for Development. You've got the time it takes to go from the bottom to the top.
Oh my
Tell
God.
her what she should be doing that she's not doing now.
You mean the one here?
Yeah. I'll tell her for you.
Well, first of all, I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say. I mean, I don't think that we are ready to pull the plug on aid, okay? Because from the little that I saw in terms of revenue raising in low-income countries, if you do that, you may end up making the poor poorer. So think twice.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Sorry, we've eaten into coffee, but I think that was a very good discussion, and I don't drink coffee, so it's okay for me. Thank you very much,
you can have
everybody.
water or oranges.
Thank you very much to our three speakers. I think we were around.